Hi guys, it's Lydia. Welcome back to my channel, Lydslunacysubmisions. We are here for another episode of Creepy Crochet and Creepypasta, a series where I crochet something creepy and talk about something even creepier. It's 9:30 p.m. right now. I'm home by myself. It's dark out. The house is settling. Things are crickling and crackling. It's about to get real creepy up in here. This story is called The Stretched People of Appalachia. Today we're going to be making Baphomet. I'm so excited. The reveal of the plushie will be at the end of the video, so make sure you stay to the end of the video to see the reveal of the plushie. Let's get into the story. The Appalachian Trail attracts tourists from all over the world. Hiking it is considered a rite of passage to some, but the stunning views are what brought my friend and coworker Jeremy and me to the Smokies. We trekked out Saturday through the mountain trail in North Carolina, just below Tennessee, eager to witness the wildlife and brilliant fall landscapes. The sun cast warm beams through the spruce firs. The sky was a magnificent pinkish golden hue that resonated within me and filled me with a long-lost appreciation for this world. "Lovely, isn't it?" Jeremy stated. He bit into a granola bar with a hearty crunch, and a few crumbs landed in his fluffy black beard. He looked like a mid-20s Santa, rosy cheeks and all. Sure beats the office. I don't know, I kinda miss corporate meetings and the soothing sounds of the broken printer. Jeremy's smile widened. Or Greg scoffing at every email request he receives. Something very zen about that too. Very soul-soothing, he joked back. "All right, Office Max, let's hit the trail." The September chill was invigorating, although it was a bit colder than I'd dressed for. I pulled up the hood on my jacket and followed Jeremy's lead, a bit surprised at seeing my stocky friend hiking up the incline so effortlessly. This was the first time we'd done anything together aside from knocking back beers over pool games or the occasional meal out. He married young and usually reserved day trips like these for his wife. She was out west with her family this time, and I was happy to oblige his offer. Twigs cracked beneath my boots as I followed Jeremy. The trees were brilliant gradients of orange, yellow, and green. Basewoods, dogwoods, and magnolias popped up in a vibrant patchwork panorama. It was truly breathtaking, and I appreciated Jeremy inviting me along on the nature walk. But then, an hour in, Jeremy decided to stray from the plotted path. We'd rounded a few narrow dirt paths to reach an overhang where Jeremy wanted to take a photo. It was an exposed face of the mountain offering a clear view of a valley below. It was obvious why he decided to take a detour for a photo op. It was gorgeous. I wheezed, a bit out of breath, as we finally climbed up the steep ridge. He slapped a gloved hand on my shoulder and smiled into the phone's camera lens as well. He'd framed a great pic of us with the enormous valley behind us. But then the device slipped from his hand and onto the steep dirt hill. We watched it tumble down into the dense cluster of trees at the bottom. "Fuck," Jeremy yelled. I really didn't look forward to climbing all the way down then all the way back up again. "Is it cool if I stay here while you get it?" I asked, eager for a break. My calves were sore and tight, and I was out of breath. "Such an indoor kid," he smirked. I shrugged. I mean, he wasn't wrong. "Sure, I'll see you in a bit." I watched Jeremy descend the steep incline, winding down off the path and into the stark shadows of the woods. "Just keep calling it so I can follow the ring." "No prob," I called back, and Jeremy, just a small form among the valley of pines, vanished. I only then realized how utterly isolated this area of the forest was. We hadn't come across another hiker in over 45 minutes, and I gathered our little detour from the main trail must have taken longer than I thought. Aside from the rustling of leaves and the occasional creaking of swaying branches, it was quiet. A loud snapping sound echoed up from the basin, a tree branch, more than likely. I dialed Jeremy's number, and soon after, I heard a very faint ringtone. The phone must have tumbled farther than I realized. I shook my head, well aware his screen was likely shattered and he'd be using mine for photos the rest of the hike. I heard the ringing phone continue for a bit, then stop as it went to voicemail. "See it?" I yelled down the side of the steep incline. The cold air was starting to numb my cheeks. Winter was on its way. No response from Jeremy. I redialed, then listened to the faint ringing from the deep woods below. When it finally went to voicemail once again, I felt a bit anxious. "Jeremy?" I yelled down. A woodpecker's rapid knocking carried over the valley from some unseen tree, but no other sound at all. "Jeremy? You okay?" I shouted down. Only the rattling groans of the trees and occasional cracking of branches was heard from below. I decided to go check on him. Hiking down the decline was easy, but I was well aware the climb back up was waiting. I was careful not to slip as I left the trail and edged my way down into the thick wooded valley where Jeremy had vanished. The pines had looked so small from up on the path, but as I descended, I realized they were enormous. It was a dense wilderness in the basin. Light barely penetrated the intertwined pine needles and leaves. "Jeremy," I called out. I should have been within hearing distance, but he still didn't respond. I called his phone once again. It rang close by. I followed the sound, spotting it a few meters ahead on the forest floor. Sure enough, the screen was cracked, but it had miraculously survived. Then I noticed something white and pearl-like on the forest floor. I walked closer and squatted down to analyze it. My guts shifted and my throat closed a bit as I realized what I was looking at. A human tooth. "Hey, Jeremy, are you okay?" I called out. I'd seen him reach the bottom, so I knew he hadn't fallen. Might not be his, I thought, and I peered into the endless pillars of tree trunks that sprawled out into the valley. Though hesitant, I decided to walk a bit in. "Jeremy!" I yelled into the woods. I could hear my own voice faintly echo off the surrounding mountains. I tried to rationalize that maybe Jeremy had headed a bit inward to relieve himself, but I was getting a bit scared. I felt the fall leaves and pine needles soften my steps as I continued on. I then saw another small, white shape on the ground. It was a bloody human molar, roots and all. The leaves surrounding it were flecked with droplets of fresh, red blood. Any notion of bravery was quickly abandoned due to the fact that those teeth landed there recently. I needed to get out of the woods and call the police. I turned back and headed towards the wood's edge in a brisk walk, wishing it was closer. I was a good 30 meters in, and I quickened my pace into a brisk jog. I felt a wave of relief when I saw his hand around a tree up ahead. "Jeremy!" I yelled out, but my jog slowed to a stop and my insides went cold. The hand wasn't as far away as I thought it was. Its size had created an optical illusion of sorts. It wasn't Jeremy's. It had long, white fingers and bulbous knuckles and looked distorted as if a normal human hand had been elongated, somehow stretched out to become twice the length. Worry melted into horror as a large, strange head peeked out from the other side of the thick tree. It was horrible, a mess of pale, saggy flesh that clung loosely to an enormous stretched skull. A bizarre, exaggerated grin that split the face in two was filled with little pointed nubs of teeth, glistening red. There was no visible nose amid the folds of bunched flesh under the eyes, which were the worst feature by far. The eyes were perfectly spherical, white orbs, glossy and wet, that stared at me with eagerness, the way an animal stares at its food. I froze, unable to peel my gaze away from the hideous face that leered at me from behind the tree. It was far too high up as well, nearly 8 feet up from the leafy ground, though it was clearly hunched. I took a hesitant step backward, and as I did, it emerged. Long, soap-white arms and legs extended from the cover of the thick tree trunk. With knobby knees and pronounced ribs, it resembled a person suffering from starvation or perhaps extreme anorexia, yet scaled up to the size of a giant. I stepped back a bit more, my boot squishing into something. I glimpsed down to see a mound of pulpy flesh beneath my boot. It was half of a human hand, a wedding band on the base of a finger missing the tip. It was Jeremy's hand. I then heard what might have been misconstrued as the wind bending those tall trees. That thing was making the sound. It took a long stride in my direction, the horrible gash of a grin dripping strings of saliva in anticipation. I ran. My heartbeat pounded in my ears as I fled. Adrenaline pumped through me as I ran deeper into the dense woods, away from that horrific giant. Wisps of ragged branches scratched my face and snagged my jeans. I soon passed shreds of clothing, chips of bone, and clumps of hair. I ran past stripped finger bones and even a meatless femur. All that remained of Jeremy were the inedible parts. I was going to die in those woods. I slowed my pace when I saw movement up ahead in the distance. 2 naked figures, slender, absurdly tall, and terribly deformed, stalked the woods with the same wide, bulging white eyes and hideous grins. They hadn't spotted me yet. My heart was pounding so hard I feared they'd hear it. I looked back, seeing that long-limbed thing striding forward. I was pinned. My only chance was to hide. I frantically scanned the area and found a wide-trunked tree that looked rotted and hollowed near the roots. It seemed like the best shot, so I raced over and squeezed myself into the hollowed base of the tree, ignoring the tearing of my jacket and the burning from scraping my skin in the process. I hushed my breathing and waited as still and quietly as I could. A few minutes later, the sound of cracking of twigs and crushed leaves drew closer. I watched through a gap in the bark as panic flooded my mind. That strange vocalization sounded once again, followed by another voice from further out in the dense forest. They were communicating. A few other rattlings, throaty sounds were made before I heard the sound of footsteps continue on, getting quieter and quieter as they continued on into the woods. I breathed out in relief, but then the view to the woods was blocked by a long, horrific face. One of those things had leaned down to look into the open gap and was now staring directly at me just a foot away. It was enormous, twice the height of my own head. Those milky white eyes stared at me, and I was sure these were my final moments. The dripping smile of that creature quivered, and it cocked its head slightly to the side. After a few seconds of reeling from the horror of its presence, I understood it wasn't seeing me at all. It was blind. Its breath was rotten and gamey. It wheezed through those small, sharp teeth and stared at me with those unseeing eyes for a few minutes, but it eventually stood, vanishing from my view. I then listened to the leaves rustle as it walked away off to some other section of the vast forest. I stayed in that hollow of the trunk for maybe an hour before I finally braved peeking out. They were gone. I was cautious to make little noise as I backtracked as best I could. I feared I'd lost my way and was heading deeper still, towards those enormous things, but the mountainside soon became visible through the leaves. I'd gotten back to the area I'd found Jeremy's detached, mangled hand, but it was gone. The cell phone was too, as well as the teeth. Nothing remained of my friend. I climbed out of the valley and began my return, all the while making calls to the park rangers and the local police. By the time I'd made it back to the car, it was surrounded by patrol cars as well as an ambulance. Officers, rangers, and paramedics were milling about, and they all were eager to question me. I explained the events that had transpired. The police were skeptical, as were the paramedics and rangers, but one weathered older park ranger named Bob took me aside after the statements were made. Bob looked at me with remorse. He then looked out into the sea of trees and spoke. My grandfather told me a folktale when I was a child, one that terrified me, one he swore was real, the story of the stretched people of Appalachia. It was an old tale of a family that fell into a cave and were trapped ages ago. Incest and evolution kept them going. The kids with the longest limbs were kept alive, and the others used for food. Evolution in the cave took their sight, but selective breeding heightened their stature bit by bit each following generation. I wished it to be a scary story to keep kids in line. I never wanted to believe him when he said he saw one in his youth from the mouth of a hidden cave. I never wanted to believe they were real. Bob's eyes grew wide, and his voice quivered with fear as he continued, or that they could eventually grow tall enough to get out. Like, I'm sorry, is that not so horrifying? Y'all, this is a no-sleep story from user mrmichaelsquid. He has other stories from what I can see. It actually seems like he hasn't posted in quite some time. Anyway, y'all, that story creeped me out. The descriptions were so good. I could literally picture the stretched people in my mind. If you like this kind of story, please let me know in the comments. If you would rather see a different kind of story, also let me know in the comments. I do plan on making videos about allegedly true stories, like actual scary encounters, and not just paranormal or about Appalachia or mimics or this, that, or the other thing, like actual real life scary experiences with scary people, because real people are scarier than fiction a lot of the time. Anyway, I just about finished up the head for Baphomet. You're gonna see him all finished up at the end. Thank you so much for watching this episode of Creepy Crochet and Creepypasta and listening to me ramble before and after the story. I'm gonna try and improve on that, can't promise anything. Now, do me a favor, leave a comment that says Art the Clown if you stayed until the end. Go follow me on TikTok for bite-sized episodes of Creepy Crochet and Creepypasta. My crochet patterns and plushies are always available on my Etsy. Ideally, I'd like to make my own website soon enough. Thank you so much for being here. Hit the like and subscribe button. I will see you in the next video. Bye, guys!